Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Madam Prime Minister, I must thank you for having been able to find time to devote to us, to give us this interview. I will try to ask you a lot of questions and compress them, mostly about you in the beginning, and thereafter about some international issues, and we shall come back, if you do not mind, to the emergency and the 20-point program. Madam, you had your first schooling in a League of Nations school, was it not, in Switzerland?
That's right, École Internationale à Genève.
Which explains why you speak French and are also acquainted with German. But I think there's a lady called Mrs. Frieda. Did she not teach you, or did she teach the children?
No.
She's a German lady here. Am I making a mistake?
Yeah, I think you are talking about Elizabeth Gorba.
Yes, that's
She's
right.
She's German, married
yes.
to an Indian. Yeah.
Yes.
She taught my children for a very brief while.
Oh, I thought it had. Then you were in Tagore's Shantiniketan. Did you actually study under Tagore himself?
No, he wasn't teaching. He was just a sort of father figure. But we saw a great deal of him.
Hovering around.
Well, he was beginning to be old, so he wasn't hovering around, but he was sitting. But he used to take a great interest, especially in the problems of the girl students. So we used to go to him, and then he used to come and watch dancing classes. So.
Your father very early deserted the law, and I think the British put him in jail for his political activities, and you returned to Switzerland. That was when your mother was very ill.
That's right. I went both times when I went to Europe. It was because of my mother's illness. I mean, the earlier visits.
Madam, I wanted to ask you to elaborate on this a bit, to see what were your reactions when you see your parents dragged to jail for causes which you believe to be world causes, because in a way the dissolution of the British Empire was the awakening of the people's conscience. So I just want to know what effect this had on you.
The atmosphere at that time was something quite different, because we were all in the thick of the struggle for independence, and to go to prison was almost a badge of honor. So I can't say that one liked it, but on the other hand, one resented it when people were not arrested. I mean, I resented it personally till I was old enough to be arrested.
I'm told there were some rather distressing incidents. Your mother was beaten up, and you were also beaten up by the police.
My mother wasn't. My grandmother was involved in what we call a lathi charge.
That makes it still more awful,
and
is it
yes,
not?
Because she was quite old and very, very frail. I was beaten up as a child also, because for flag hoisting and things like that.
Did not the House of Commons intervene then, madam? I'm told they usually...
I doubt it very much.
But...
their version of democracy was only democracy for themselves.
Yes, it appears, I mean, to the developing nation it doesn't quite matter which brand it is. I mean, we suffer the governments. But they did release your father ultimately to see your mother die.
Yes, he was with us then in Switzerland. He had been in and out, of course. I mean, he wasn't in prison continuously.
I see. Then you went to Oxford at Somerville, the Ladies' College.
Yes, that's right. In fact, one of the times when my father was arrested, he sent me a cable going to Other Home.
I see. And I remember that faraway land speech of Chamberlain, when they sold Czechoslovakia down the drain, you accompanied your father to Czechoslovakia, didn't you?
Yes, we were there when the Runciman mission was there.
What was the mood of the students at Oxford then about this selling away honor, as Churchill put it, the path of dishonor business?
Well, I can only talk about the group of students with whom I moved, and of course they were all very indignant. In fact, I think that the large majority of people knew that this was far from avoiding of war, was bringing it on, which is actually what happened.
But you actually campaigned for for some members of the British Labour Party or the university.
Just for a short while, yes.
And did you know the Webbs? Did you come to meet them, or were they before your time?
They were really before my time, but of course I knew them through their books and through my father talking about them.
And Lasky?
Lasky I knew quite well because he was supposed to be keeping an eye on me when I was there. But the last time we met we quarreled because he felt that I had a life of my own and I was sacrificing it for my father. He felt I shouldn't go around with him because I accompanied him in Europe, and he said, well, you are old enough to go out, to go on your own and make your own contacts and so on.
This is the rather distressing part. They don't understand that tagging on to one's parent is not necessarily, because the way, one of the distressing things is the way that old people are thrown in the dust heap in England, and we could possibly think of doing that here. There is no inconsistency. Don't you think so?
Well, I think so, but I think the industrial society is changing people's character as well.
It's awful when old people have to depend on strangers to take them to places and their own flesh and blood leading independent lives. I'm making the point only because Lasky quarreled with you, madam. Paul Robson, when did you come to...
I don't remember the year, but I think it was just about that time when after my mother died. It must have been 35 or so.
I seem to have read that he was not allowed admission either at Harvard or Boston because he was black.
It may be, I don't know.
I read it somewhere.
But I know that he never spoke of it, but his wife did, of this constant being humiliated, and, being asked to a dinner because he was famous and he had such a wonderful voice, and yet being
made to feel
that he wasn't. He was a black.
Well, I felt that myself when I couldn't get a flat in London. That was in 1950s. I thought I should tell them every time, look, I am an Indian, so you might as well tell me whether the flat is taken or not. And Ernest Troller, you met them at the time that you met him at the time that you were studying?
Yes.
Did you meet La Passionaria of...
Yes, I did. Yeah, this was in Paris. There was a conference on Spain, but it was an official type. There was, I can't remember who, some lord who was presiding over it. And they didn't think that Passionara should come and speak to us. And we felt I wasn't a delegate at all, I was just a visitor. I think my father was there. But we, the younger people, felt very strongly that, well, here was a person straight from Spain, and she had become almost a symbol of Spanish resistance. So when they didn't allow her in the main conference, we said we'll have a separate, and we had a most magnificent meeting in a huge shed.
Can I take this back again? This failure of youth's idealism in the International Brigade in Spain, this was really heartbreaking at that time. That was when they decided not to fight for empire, was it not, at Oxford? They passed resolutions that resolved that this house will not fight for king and empire or something like that.
Yes, some such resolution was passed, but I don't quite remember the dates.
But
well, the International Brigade didn't fail largely because they were disorganized and they were a voluntary sort of body, whereas And there was, the others were very well organized.
But I seem to remember a picture of your father, Krishna Menon, actually on almost the front line in...
Yes, they had... I couldn't go because I had to do an exam just at that time.
It's awful having to do examinations. But then you went to jail during
after my return in 1942.
Why did they not put you together with your father? Why did they separate you?
No, because the men and women are kept separate. See, I was in the women's jail. Anyhow, I was not arrested with my father.
He was kept with Gandhiji.
Yes, no, he was not with Gandhiji. Gandhiji was in the Aga Khan's palace. My father and the other members of the working committee were in the Ahmednagar fort. And I was arrested much later in Allahabad, so I was in what is called Naini Central Prison.
And your husband also was not left out.
Well, we were arrested more or less together.
This was very considerate, was it
no,
not?
No, not at all. You see, I got news of my impending arrest, so I held a meeting. My husband was supposed to be underground, but he got rather agitated because there was British military, just aiming at us before I was arrested. And so he got rather excited and he forgot about his being underground and came out.
And that's
that's
how you went to the other home.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, undoubtedly, being directly under Mahatma Ji's influence, you were very much affected in your approach. I suppose there is essentially a non-violent approach to things you do.
I very strongly believe in a non-violent approach, except when one has to meet violence, like aggression on the country.
And not to show cowardice. I think Mahatma Ji said,
I think that's an important part of a person anyhow.
It's better to be violent than to be a coward. Now, you see, we have been brought up, our science and things like that, on the letters which your father wrote to you. Have these letters been preserved? Where are the originals?
They're in a museum.
I see.
In the Allahabad Museum. To go back to your point about violence, I think a lot of violence is due to cowardice.
Because a crowd is essentially a coward because when it attacks.
A crowd or even a small group, when they feel that they cannot meet a situation any other way and they don't have the courage to fight it out intellectually or argue it out, or they take to these methods.
Now, may I ask a very personal question? Why did you refuse to be the Minister for Foreign Affairs and chose information instead? Or rather accepted information instead when you first became a minister?
Well, I really chose it. I suggested it. I thought it would be, it's a fascinating subject. And also I didn't want to take an important ministry, what was then considered, although personally I consider information very important.
Oh, madam,
but in the public eye it isn't considered.
I do feel let down because I forced my Prime Minister to take on the Ministry of Information himself. And Madam, we'll come to this part after the death of Mr. Shastri, and there's a spate of United Front governments which disunited and united and things like that. And then came that election of Chief Justice Subbarao pitted against Zakir Hussain. I think he resigned after giving that property rights judgment in Golaknath in order to, after that he fought an election and lost. You supported Zakir Hussain then?
Yes, he was our candidate. And we had set him up after very wide-ranging consultations.
Unfortunately, he died only a year or so in office, and then...
Yes.
But the Congress, was it not a disparate body? How could it group people with such different ideology? Because ultimately, I think this thing came out in the Giri election. It was a division along ideological lines?
It's, yes, on the whole, but I think that personal factors had also crept in. The Congress has been not so much a political party as a mass movement during the independence movement, and it largely remained the same sort of thing, and even today we have people of very different backgrounds and even of views, although it's a little more cohesive than it used to be.
A kind of reflection of the country itself.
Of the country itself.
Yes. Now, but in
Mr. Giri's election, some other things had come up too. I think that there was a group in the old Congress which didn't want me there. And I felt that if the party didn't want me, then I would certainly go, and I should go. But that this should not be maneuvered by a small group of people.
Certainly, I think that's...
And I felt it was the Prime Minister's ship which was under attack. I mean, they considered that the chair of the Prime Minister was not important. The party was more important.
You believe, therefore, in this institution of the Prime Ministership? I mean, because I think Pandit Thakurdas Bhargav said that in the Constituent Assembly, that the Prime Minister's voice is the final voice and the President is merely the echo, rather like the British monarch.
Well, I wouldn't call the President an echo, but...
No, I mean no disrespect. I'm referring to the British system of...
Yes, constitutional...
in fact, in Britain, the monarchy rarely speaks. Now, but that split was between, therefore, the rightists and the progressives.
Broadly speaking, but of course, I don't think it's as tidy as that.
It is this French habit of trying to put things in compartments, madam. You must excuse that. Now, then the showdown came in 1971 when the central election to the Central Parliament took place, and you got about 350 out of 520 seats, was it not?
Yes.
And the platform was whether poverty would be removed or inequalities continued. Is that also an oversimplification?
Really. That is an oversimplification, because we had never said that we could remove poverty.
No, tried to.
That steps would be taken, more vigorous steps than had been taken earlier, because all our planning aimed at the removal of poverty and the lessening of economic disparities. But we felt that the Congress had somewhat strayed from that path, and we wanted to bring it back.
But I don't think anybody understood
But basically, the propaganda campaign of the opposition was merely to remove me. And this is how our young people thought up that slogan, that what is more important? Is it more important to remove Indira or to remove poverty? This is how the slogan came about.
And the people gave its answer.
Yeah.
And in 72, I suppose, you wiped the floor with the opposition. You controlled 20 out of the 23 states, and you are a major partner in Kerala.
Yeah.
Madam, I would like to know, because the youth is very much interested in this. I'm sorry if it sounds like cross-examination. You said you were not a doctrinaire socialist. Could you sort of tell us a little bit more?
Well, people tend to think of whether it's socialism or something else in terms of slogans. A lot of people think that only nationalization or state control means socialism. And perhaps the older version of it did. Now we, in India, I think we are socialists. I mean, we chose that word because it's the nearest to what we want to do. But it doesn't mean that we want to imitate what has happened in,
whatever country.
All the other countries where revolutions have taken place. But we have to take a path which lessens the inequalities amongst our people. It's not just an ideal, it's a very practical necessity for the future of the country. And I think that the interests of even the richest people lies in the stability of the country. And you cannot have stability or harmony or progress unless there is greater equality, when we have such vast masses of poor people.
may I sort of just change the topic? You see, the charge is made that you are pro-Russian. If it is so, is it pro-Russian government or pro-Russian institutions? And may I ask the same question about China?
Well, I can answer quite categorically that we are not, in a way we are pro every country because we want friendship with every country regardless of their system.
I mean, with the peoples you have no quarrel.
No, but even otherwise, as a government, our constant effort is to make friends with as many countries as we possibly can. But we are only pro-India. And our policies are based on what we consider to be in the national interest. Now, the Soviet Union has consistently supported, freedom movements, and later on the cause of the non-aligned or the Afro-Asian groups in various international forums. So in that way,
you have certain...
No, I mean they support us rather than we support them. This is what I'm trying to say, that when an issue comes up in United Nations or any other place, they usually support the non-aligned and the Afro-Asian group.
Yes,
so it's not that we are voting for them, but they're voting for us. Also in India, they were the first to help us with our public sector, that is the state sector. Now, of course, other countries are helping, and even the USA is. But initially, the USA hesitated. And in fact, our talks were with them, but when they refused, then the Soviets helped us out with the steel plant.
I don't know if I got my facts right. I think it was the Soviets who helped to locate the oil first when the others said there was none, was it not?
Soviets, and then we had a lot of help from Romania also.
Romania, of course,
the Romanian experts.
The East European countries. But the others had said there was...
that has nothing to do with the governments though, because that was the oil company.
Yes, I mean, oil companies and governments are very much the same for certain countries.
Well, sometimes the companies seem to be almost...
a government.
Not a government, but they wield a lot of influence.
Yes. Now, I wanted to ask you something which again troubles our youth, you see. They put these questions. They say why they should not have their own independent socialist line, neither this variety nor that variety. They even kick up against the orthodoxy of non-alignment. I don't know if it's a rebellion or could you, I mean, has this problem sort of attracted your attention?
We ourselves firmly believe that whatever type of socialism we have should be an Indian type, which is suited to this country, which meets the demands and the needs of our people. Non-alignment isn't, I thought the whole point of being non-aligned was not to be orthodox. But, and it was to keep away from the rigid blocks that this third grouping came in. But I like the word third world, or words rather, although they've come to... Because we think there's only one world, and we think we should move more and more towards this one world.
Now, since you say you are preoccupied with being pro-India, do you intend to have a kind of uniformity in India? I mean, in regards, I'm not referring to its laws, but in regard to its kind of its language, its culture. I mean, turning out so many different sausages, if I may say so, all one.
We couldn't do it if we wanted to, and we are proud and happy about our diversity because we think that this adds to the interest in life and the richness of our culture. As you know, every state has its own language, its own script, and within the state also there are different regions, cultural groupings. And we also think that this diversity is not a weakening factor, but on the contrary, it's a strengthening factor. Unity in diversity is what the slogan says.
Therefore, I take it that you are not anti different languages as such, though they are the nightmare of the radio and television people, having different.
We have no such problem here because since each state has its own language, its radio functions largely in that language. But we provide for all the minorities, the minority groups who may be living in that state.
May I probe further? I mean, if you had your way, would you impose a particular language, a particular way of life?
No, oh no. I think that's, I rebelled against it even much earlier with regard to clothes and so on when I was young. No, I think that the greater the diversity, the better it is for people. I mean, people are individuals and they shouldn't become statistics. But I do believe that there should be a link. Now in India we have a formula which we call the three-language formula. I must confess it hasn't worked, but it doesn't mean that it's not worth trying for, which is that you first have your mother tongue, then you have a national link language, and then you have an international link language.
I very much appreciate that you have started broadcasting in Sanskrit. I think this is going to be an integration factor as regards Hindi, Bengali, Telugu, Tamil. And because there is a move in certain countries that we must do away with all differences. We must come to one common factor, have one language and one kind of dress and the kind of rigid kind of things that they had in, I don't want to use the word monasteries, but in armies and things like that, a kind of uniform everywhere. Do you agree with this?
No, I'm against uniforms, except of course the army needs one. And sometimes it's useful in schools because it brings in a certain discipline.
But in adults, no.
But certainly not. Even in schools, I think that if we could persuade people, to have that discipline without these outer trappings of it, it would be better not to have.
Some countries have some problem, about the school. I mean, they insist on the Indian girls wearing skirts and not wearing saris or salwar and kurtas and things like that. It's very much a live question in many countries. I want to move on to another aspect. You see, it's this right to differ, which people claim, and its concomitant is the acceptance by those who claim it that the other side also has the right to differ from what they are differing.
But they don't always look at it that way. They feel they have a right to differ, but the others don't.
The others must conform. But it's contrary to throughout the history of India. I mean, you have people who are atheists, people who are pantheists, people who believed in no God, people who believed in several gods, and still they were all given the same kind of honor.
And basically, this is not only our state policy, but it is, I think, the tolerance of other views is basic to Indian culture. And all the old Sanskrit sloks, they have many which say that the paths to truth are many. But
I think that's the essential feature of this continent, that it doesn't claim the monopoly of the one path. Madame, maintenant, quelques mots en français. Je ne sais pas si on dit la première ministre ou le premier ministre, je crois. Le premier ministre, très bien. No. Even in the international women's year, François Giroud ne serait pas très content de savoir. Vous avez été en France. C'était au temps du président Pompidou ou de Giscard? C'était avant Bangladesh.
Oui, j'étais là quand le général de Gaulle était.
Ah bon, c'était le général lui-même.
Mais M. Pompidou était le Premier ministre. Je suis allée encore une fois après. Oui.
On a dit de vous que vous avez voulu être une Jeanne d'Arc.
J'admirais Jeanne d'Arc beaucoup. Comme j'admirais tous ceux qui luttaient pour l'indépendance.
C'était toujours contre les Anglais, vous savez, Jeanne d'Arc c'était contre les Anglais.
Oui, mais moi j'admirais les autres aussi. Comme Garibaldi et Bolivar et tout.
Il y a une chose qui nous chicane un petit peu. Nous vous voyons toujours au boulot. Vous ne prenez pas de congé?
Presque pas.
Vous savez, les Français aimeraient vous recevoir. Vous savez, c'est un beau pays.
C'est un très beau pays et j'aime beaucoup la langue française aussi.
Mais pas de détente. Pas de détente personnelle. Mais est-ce que vous avez du temps pour les enfants? Vous avez des petits-enfants, n'est-ce pas?
Oui.
Mais est-ce que vos préoccupations, parce que l'autre jour, quand vous avez reçu les Mauriciens, vous avez dit que vous excusez d'être en retard de 5 minutes parce que vous aviez travaillé jusqu'à fort tard, 3h30 du matin. Mais pourtant, nous étions 1 heure en retard. Mais jusqu'à quand vous continuez sur cette sorte de vous immoler, si je peux dire, au travail, sans un congé, sans...
Mais vous savez, c'est parce que même quand je travaille, pour moi, c'est pas un travail. C'est quelque chose qui est important, c'est quelque chose qui m'intéresse.
Est-ce que vous voulez porter toujours cette couronne d'épines?
Oh non, oh non, non. Mais ce que je voulais dire, que tout ce que je fais toujours avec tout cœur.
I'm going back to English because the 20-point program, how do you condense it? I mean, it's basically asking people to do an honest day's work. I mean, this is how I see it. I've been here 2 months. And what you're asking is
that's part of it, because nothing can be done without a great deal of discipline, and especially in a developing country like India, at the stage of development at which we are. But the 20-point program had more than that, because it had certain specific points about helping those who are the very poorest in this country, largely the tribals, and because we had a program of removing the age debts of...
You see, there is a problem, madam. I think there's a lack of communication. People who go for holidays to Brighton and then think about sending old clothes to Oxfam and War and Want do not know that there are others who are very, very unfortunately placed. And I think it is this idea that explains your striving 24 hours out of 24 for those, because they form about 90% of India almost, don't they?
Well, no, we've made a lot of advance, because when we first became free, there were a few very rich people, there was a small middle class, and there were masses and masses of poor. Now I can say that that picture is somewhat changed, and the middle class has grown. And amongst the poor also, sections of them have improved their standard of living, but of course everything in India is on a big scale, so even those that remain, it's a very large number. And the worst amongst them are our tribal people, because they were quite cut off from the rest of India. And that is, there were no communications, hardly any roads. So even to help them to catch up is a much more difficult problem than the people who live in the hills also.
But
Again, for the same
these
reason.
also you don't want to destroy their characteristic. You want them to preserve their characteristic.
We want them to keep
their customs, their language.
As far as possible.
As far as possible.
But it is sometimes it's difficult, because when they get educated, they want to change also.
Madam, I read a bit of history. Abraham Lincoln, who is called the consolidator of the states, was similarly accused of trying to break the states, of trying to put people in prison, to override judgments and things like that. Do you see yourself?
No, look, I'm a very humble person, and I think that Abraham Lincoln was one of the greatest men there were. But he did face a somewhat similar problem, because a lot of people thought that he should compromise with the South rather than give so much importance to the abolition of slavery and keeping the Union intact. Strangely enough, that just a couple of days ago, an American has sent me a play which was very well known when it was written. It's on Lincoln by Drinkwater.
Drinkwater. I had that as my textbook, madam, for the school certificate. It was remarkable.
It is a beautiful play.
Remarkable. But we don't consider you any lesser than Lincoln, The other day, when the Mauritian boys and girls came to see you, it rained, You waited for us for a long time, and you said about the clouds and Mauritius being one of the silver lining. We were touched, we were very touched. मैं आपसे कुछ अर्ज करूंगा कि हिंदी में हमारे हिंदी जानने भाइयों के बारे में कुछ कह दीजिए, जिस तरह से आपने कहा था।
आप कुछ पूछिए तो।
ये लोग हर एक गांव में अपने भाषा और अपनी संस्कृति को बगैर सरकारी मदद करते आए हैं। उनके आपने तो देखा उन लोगों को, आप क्या समझते हैं कि वो गलत राह पर हैं?
नहीं, गलत रास्ते पे तो नहीं है, क्योंकि दूसरे लोग भी तो यही कर रहे हैं। लेकिन दूसरे लोग समझते हैं कि कुछ बरसों से, क्योंकि उनका राज्य रहा इतने देशों पर, तो अपनी तई को ज़रा हम लोगों से ऊंचा समझने लगे अपनी तई। लेकिन हर एक व्यक्ति को अपना रास्ता खुद चुनना चाहिए।
तो हमारे महर्षियों ने कहा। लेकिन आप एक तुलसी जयंती के बारे में मैंने देखा कि मॉरिशस में लोगों जब यहाँ से गए, लोग रामायण बाखुद अपने कलम से लिख के रखा गया। वो हमें मुझे बहुत गर्व हुआ, क्योंकि इस बात देखकर
रामायण का प्रभाव तो बहुत दूर दूर तक है, क्योंकि इधर एशिया के दूसरे देशों में भी, इंडोनेशिया और उधर बहुत प्रभाव है। हर साल उसका उत्सव भी मनाते हैं बहुत ज़ोर शोर से।
मैंने वायदा किया था कि मैं 45 मिनट में ख़त्म करूंगा। देखिए, वायदा तो मैं नहीं रख सका, इसलिए मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ कि आप हम लोग को करीब 1 घंटे दे दिए। I thank you very much, madame. Je vous en remercie. J'espère que vous réussirez. Nous savons que vous allez réussir. Nous sommes tous avec vous, tous ceux qui pensent, tous ceux qui sont contre la pauvreté, contre l'inégalité. Et quand vous retournez à Maurice?
Well, give my very good wishes to the people of Mauritius.
But you have not told us when you're going to come.
I'd be delighted to come one of these days.
Thank you, madam.